Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our 11th Apcu Zoom forum today with the theme, The Role of the Communist Party of China in the Making of Modern China. Tomorrow, July 1, China is observing the 100th founding anniversary of the Communist Party of China. And that is why we are holding this forum today. We have invited our distinguished panel of speakers to talk about this theme. To start today's program, we will call on Apcu Vice President, Mr. Felix Guanzon, to give the invocation.
Let us bow our heads and place ourselves in the presence of the God, the Lord. Almighty Father, we praise and thank you for this day. We come to you this hour asking for your blessing and helping hand. Lord, bestow your divine wisdom to all of us present here. As we gather together virtually, we pray for your guidance in the matter at hand and ask that you would clearly show us how to conduct our work with spirit of joy. Give us the desire to find ways to excel on our work. Help us to work together and encourage each other to excellence. We also pray our brothers and sisters who are suffering due to the coronavirus disease. We pray for their courage of heart and strength of mind and body. Never leave them, comfort them, and keep them well. Father Almighty, look upon us in your mercy, especially this tragic time. We pray in the confidence of your love. Amen.
Thank you, VP Felix. Is Chairman Raul here already?
Yes, good afternoon, President Jeff. Good afternoon to the members of the board and guests and our speakers and participants of this virtual forum.
Kindly give the opening remarks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, President Jeff. Again, distinguished panelists and guests and members and officers of Apcu, good afternoon. I will preface my opening remarks with a line borrowed from the renowned Oxford historian Peter Frank Copan, who wrote convincingly that, and I quote, "Decisions being made in today's world that really matter are not being made in Paris, London, Berlin, or Rome, and if I may add, Washington, as they were 100 years ago, but in Beijing and Moscow, in Tehran and Riyadh, in Delhi and Islamabad, in Kabul and in Taliban-controlled areas of Afghanistan, in Ankara, in Damascus, and in Jerusalem," unquote. I wanted to remind the reader, he presses on with his argument that the world's past has been shaped by what happens along the Silk Roads. And I wanted to underline that so too will its future, unquote. China today is building back these ancient roads through the Belt and Road Initiative as a global initiative. It has no equal and perhaps none is or more consequential. It impresses indelibly upon the world how visionary, wealthy, and powerful modern China has grown. China, the Council on Foreign Relations writes, is looking to make the global order the roles of the road in ways that suit China more. It is building transport and commercial networks linking Asia to Europe and Africa under the leadership of the Communist Party of China. And China is also building its own residence in the Earth's orbit. A few weeks ago, 3 Chinese astronauts blasted off from a base in the Gobi Desert, and their spacecraft docked with the country's own version of a space station to rival the International Space Station. When completed, the Chinese space station will be called Tiangong, in English, Heavenly Palace. History tells us about China's internal turmoil late in the 19th century. Invading powers divided it into occupied zones. It became rocked by a rebellion before it did or slid into a state of civil strife. It was a war that went on for decades and ended decisively in 1949 with a victory by the Communist Party, which founded the People's Republic of China. What the Communist Party inherited was a fabled but backward old kingdom with its people mired in abject poverty and its manufacturing industries almost non-existent. Very recently, the Communist Party of China has liberated more than 800 million Chinese people from poverty. But sealing its borders, it set out to unite the country. And as with all great transformations, China made a great deal of sacrifices and adjustments in trying to find the right way forward. And what was China like in those years? Henry Kissinger, the American diplomat, answered with this line in his memoirs, The White House Years. Kissinger wrote, for 20 years, US policymakers considered China as brooding, chaotic, fanatical, and alien realm difficult to comprehend, and I quote. Then sometime in February 1972, US President Richard Nixon arrived in China, accompanied among others by Kissinger. China under communist rule finally had its way. And with Deng Xiaoping leading market reforms in the late 1970s, after the passing of the old guard, China's enormous economic potential was unleashed, reaching breakneck double-digit growth in the early 2000s. Its repercussions continue to be felt worldwide in this century. China is a driving force behind the creation of institutions to support other countries in the Asia-Pacific region. These are the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or AIIB, and the New Development Bank, previously known as the BRICS Development Bank. So in 7 decades, how did the Communist Party of China create a world superpower? What decisions were critical to China's success? And what does the future look like for China with its Belt and Road Initiative and its
Chairman Raul, you're cut off. Is that correct, Raven?
It's disconnected, sir.
Si Chairman Raul, ano?
Po.
Let's give Chairman Raul a few more seconds to dial in. In the meantime, I would like to first ask our Vice Chairman, Sixto Benedicto, to announce the Apcu Awards.
Yeah. Good afternoon, President Jeff. Thank you. I'm happy to announce the 10 laureates of the 2021 awards for promoting Philippines-China Understanding 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, Apcu members, friends, and colleagues, since its launch in January of this year, members of the board and the committee behind the awards for promoting Philippines-China Understanding, or APPCU, had endeavored to streamline its search for well-deserving individuals for recognition of their efforts and contributions in fostering and promoting understanding, appreciation, and the reinforcement of amity between the Philippines and China. From a list of 26 nominees received beginning the early quarter of this year, 10 individuals from both public and private sector have passed the 3-stage selection and judging process. prestige, nature, and extent of their works are largely the basis for the identification of their respective award category. Currently, there are 3 categories for the award. The Hall of Fame category, which acknowledges the prestige and stature of the individual and the immense effort of work the individual has done over time, as may be evidenced by the extent of each impact and reception of the works by communities and societies. The Outstanding Contribution category, which recognizes individuals of lesser prominence, but has nonetheless made notable contribution in promoting and strengthening Philippines-China bilateral relations, friendship, cooperation, and understanding. And the third, the Major Contribution category, which recognizes the work of individuals whose works have a growing reach and impact on the lives of specific groups of or communities of people at the grassroots levels. Ladies and gentlemen, Apcu members, friends, and colleagues, the Association for Philippines-China Understanding, and the Embassy of the People's Republic of China in the Republic of the Philippines are delighted and proud to announce the 10 laureates of the award for promoting Philippines-China Understanding, or APPCU, for this year, 2021. This year's very first APPCU Hall of Fame awardees are former First Lady Imelda Romualdez Marcos and former Special Envoy of the Philippines to China and the Philippine Silk Road International Chamber of Commerce Chairman, Ambassador Francis Chua. Awardees for the APPCU Outstanding Contributions are Philippine Association for Chinese Studies President Dr. Romel Banlawi, Global Talk News Radio and ang Maestro host Herman Camentong Laurel, Kaisa para sa Kaunlaran Inc. Founder Teresita Angsi, and Confucius Institute at UP Diliman Director Dr. Lourdes Tanhueco Nepomuceno. Awardees for the Major Contribution category are founding president of Peking University Overseas Students Alumni Association, Professor Jaime Flor Cruz, physician, lawyer, and professor at the University of San Agustine's College of Liberal Arts in Iloilo, Dr. Mario Leonardo Emilio Aportadera, President and Editor-in-Chief of SovereignPH.com, Adolfo Ado Paglinawan, and the 51 Talk Brand Ambassador, John Nicolo Fernandez. All awardees will receive a trophy, a plaque of recognition, and a certificate. Prize money, on the other hand, will be given to each of the awardees for the Outstanding Contribution and Major Contributions category. The 10 awardees will be given recognition in an award ceremony to be held on the 6th of August this year. This will be live streamed on various social media platforms like Facebook and YouTube, more particularly in Chinese Embassy, Manila, PDB4 and Apcu Facebook pages, and on Chinatown TV on YouTube. APPCU is a novel award-giving body that pays special tribute to Filipinos who have made efforts through time in strengthening friendly ties and promoting mutual understanding between the Philippines and China, using their respective advocacies and expertise in the various fields and disciplines of mass media and public service, trade and commerce, and arts, culture, and the sciences. On this note, may we all be infused with vigorous passion as we take on a greater role in the communal task of promoting Philippine-China mutual understanding and friendship. Thank you and Godspeed.
Thank you. Chairman Raul is back.
Yes,
Chairman
I'm
Raul,
here.
yeah, perhaps you would like to finish your opening
Yes,
remarks, yeah, before you were
There's
cut
only one
off.
paragraph left before my electricity was cut off. Anyway, that's the problem if you are in the boondocks. Okay. Well, our distinguished panel of speakers in today's forum will provide analysis and answers in what should be an extremely interesting forum today. So again, welcome to all. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Raul. And now I will call on Vice Chairman Sixto again to introduce our first distinguished guest speaker for today.
Thank you, Chairman Raul Lambino and President Jeffrey. May I introduce our speaker for today, who graduated from Zhejiang University, China on 1996. He served as an attaché for Chinese Embassy in People's Republic of Bangladesh for years 1997 to 2001, and as second secretary, and deputy division director for Department of Asian Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China on 2002 to 2008. He also worked as the chief of political section in the Chinese Embassy in the Republic of India on 2008 to 2011, followed by his service as a division director of Department of Asian Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China. His expertise also been shown by portraying the role of being the deputy chief minister and political counselor of the Chinese Embassy in the Kingdom of Cambodia and the Chinese Embassy in the Republic of the Philippines from 2018 up to present. He is the deputy chief minister and minister counselor of Chinese Embassy in the Republic of the Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great esteem that we introduce to you our first speaker, who will talk about the role of the Communist Party of China in the making of modern China, the Honorable Charge d'Affaires ad interim Tan Ching Sheng. Let us welcome.
Thank you. Honorable Secretary Raul Lambino, Chairman of the Association of Philippine-China Understanding, Mr. Jeffrey Nang, President of Apcu, Mr. Raymond Casipo, Executive Director of Institute for Political and Electoral Reform, Professor Zha Daozhong, School of International Studies of Peking University, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to meet you all online to exchange thoughts on the role of the Communist Party of China in the making of modern China. On behalf of the Chinese Embassy, I would like to extend warm welcome to all the speakers and guests participating in today's forum. I would also like to give special thanks to the Association for Philippines-China Understanding for hosting this event. Let me also congratulate the 10 laureates who have won the award. Tomorrow, the CPC will celebrate its centenary anniversary. Over the last century, the party has grown from a small party with over 50 members to the world's largest Marxist ruling party with more than 95 million members. The past century has also witnessed the breathtaking development miracles created by China under the leadership of the CPC. China has experienced tremendous transformation. Under the leadership of CPC, China has achieved its industrialization in just a few decades that took developed Western countries several centuries, creating maybe the greatest economic revolution in the history of mankind. China now stands as the world's second largest economy and the largest trader of goods. remarkable achievements have been made in infrastructure building. For instance, China's high-speed rail has reached 30,000 kilometers, more than 2/3 of the world's total. China has lifted as many as 800 million people out of poverty in a short span of 40 years, which is more than 70% of the global total. China has established highly efficient socialist system. Among others, the systems of People's Congress, CPC-led multi-party cooperation and political consultation, regional ethnic autonomy, and self-governance at the grassroots level are successful examples. The unique governance system of China has proved to be very effective by massively improving the Chinese people's lives. For the world at large, it has blazed a new trail of modernization and created new options of good governance, other than the Western model we already knew. China has worked hard for the common good of the world, committed to building a community with a shared future for mankind. China has always been an active promoter for peace, development, and progress of the world. China has become the largest contributor of peacekeepers among the permanent members of the UN Security Council, and the second largest founding contributor to the UN peacekeeping operations. Over the past 20 years, China has contributed an average of nearly 30% to global growth annually. A quarter of least developed countries' total export has flowed to China since 2008. In our fight against COVID-19, China has provided numerous medical supplies to more than 150 countries and 13 international organizations, including over 400 million doses of vaccines. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not by chance, but through sensible choice and arduous efforts that all these remarkable achievements have been made. From my point of view, the CPC's recipe for success mainly lies in the following elements. First, the CPC has always put people first. The CPC is a party representing the overall interests of the Chinese people, rather than particular groups. Serve the people as a motto is not only physically inscribed on the wall of Xinhua Gate at the Zhongnanhai office of the CPC Central Committee, but also deeply in the hearts of all party members. The people-centered approach of the CPC has earned huge endorsement and trust of the Chinese people. Between 2003 and 2016, Harvard University has conducted 8 surveys on China. According to its findings published in July 2020, 93% of the Chinese people are satisfied with the Chinese government. Besides, a survey conducted by York University of Canada last May showed that the effective handling of the COVID-19 pandemic in China has greatly enhanced Chinese citizens' confidence and trust in its government, which reached a record high of 98%. That is quite extraordinary by any measure in any country. Second, the CPC has made the most of its governance system. The CPC has adhered to the principle democratic centralism, which emphasizes collective leadership and collective decision-making, so as to ensure informed decisions, feasible and sustainable. In that spirit, China is able to pool national strength to carry out magnificent undertakings and overcome major challenges. And never since China has wavered in its conviction to turn the blueprint into reality. As you know, China has consecutively formulated 14 five-year plans since 1953, which has provided strong guidance to its national development. The public infrastructure improvements, scientific and technology breakthroughs, among others, all came as the outcome. Third, the CPC has pioneered a path of development that fits China. Facing various difficulties and uncertainties, the party does not just copy and paste any other doctrine. Instead, it has constantly adjusted its strategy and direction based on experience and ground situation, and finally blazed the right pathway for the nation. For example, Chairman Mao Zedong proposed the ways towards victory, such as encircling the cities from the countryside and seizing political power from the barrier of a gun. Later on, Mr. Deng Xiaoping has made the historical policy decision on reform and opening up. President Xi Jinping has committed to improving the socialist system with Chinese characteristics and modernizing China's system and capacity for governance. Through these trials and practices, the party has kept abreast with the times and led China to continuously achieve its goals in different periods. The last but not the least, the CPC has all along remained open and inclusive. The party has stayed vibrant and resilient by readily drawing on the achievements of other civilizations as well as advanced experiences from other countries. In the spirit of mutual trust, equity and justice, and win-win cooperation, the CPC has had extensive and profound exchanges with political parties and peoples around the world. China never copies others' model, nor does China demand others to copy its way. The better China develops, the more it would benefit the world and bring ample strategic and economic opportunities for the world. Ladies and gentlemen, to understand China, it is essential to have a good knowledge of the CPC. Without the CPC, there would not be the founding of the People's Republic of China, nor the modern China. With the centenary anniversary as a brand new starting point, the party will lead the Chinese people to embark on a new journey toward greater development and common prosperity. China stands ready to deepen win-win cooperation with other countries, including the Philippines, to build a community with a shared future for mankind. The CPC will also continue to further exchanges with the political parties of the Philippines. I'm confident that with our joint efforts, China and the Philippines will embrace a shared brighter future. Thank you, and mabuhay.
Thank you very much, Sharzay Dafer Tan Ching Sheng. And now we would like to call on Ms. Mafi Hung Chai, Apcu Chairman of the Youth Committee, to introduce our second speaker.
Thank you, President Jeff. So let's move on to our next speaker for today. He is currently the Vice President of Novotrends PH, a survey and research company. He currently chairs the U.S. International Visitor Leadership Program Philippines. He currently sits in the board of the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights Asia. He is also a member of the Association for Philippines-China Understanding and the Philippine Political Science Association. He co-chaired the 2002 Go NGO National Electoral Reform Summit, the 2003 Go NGO National Voter Education Summit, the 2007 Electoral Reform Summit on Election Modernization, the Stakeholders Summit on the 2004 elections, the 2007 elections, the 2010 elections, and the 2016 elections. He sat as a member of the Commission on Elections Advisory Council on Election Automation for the 2010 elections. He also acted as a consultant with the Department of Interior and Local Government Center for Federalism and Constitutional Reforms from 2017 to 2020. He was the past member of the Board of Trustees and Executive Director of the Institute for Political and Electoral Reform. He was also the chairperson of the Consortium on Electoral Reforms, a coalition of 47 civil society organizations advocating electoral reforms. He headed the CER-initiated Bantay Eleksyon, the first domestic monitoring mission in Philippine elections. He also sat in the Pera at Politika Working Group, a pioneering project on monitoring campaign financing. He led the pioneering advocacy project against election violence, Vote for Peace in 2010, and the Payapang Bayan, Payapang Halalan for the 2013 elections. He observed the 2004 U.S. elections upon the invitation of the U.S. State Department. He participated in various international conferences, including the UN Vienna World Conference on Human Rights, year 1993, the Congress of Democrats from the Islamic World in Indonesia, year 2005, and the World Forum on Democracy in Asia in Taipei, year 2005, in Manila, 2007, and in Seoul, 2009. He also attended the ASEAN Election Management Bodies Forum in Jakarta, year 2011, and Seoul, 2009. The workshop on election-related challenges in young democracies in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia in year 2012, the Asian Electoral Stakeholder Forum in Bangkok in year 2012, Dili, 2015, Bali, 2016, and in Colombo, 2017. The UN Thematic Consultation on Governance and the Post-2015 Development Agenda in Johannesburg in year 2013. He also accepted invitations in South Korea, Japan, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, Bangladesh, Belgium, Sweden, Germany, United States, and Switzerland. He served as a member of technical working groups and as a resource person in committee hearings on political reform bills in Congress. He has often been consulted by embassies, credit rating agencies, government agencies, business groups, non-governmental organizations, and people's organizations. He has also written numerous articles on various topics in the field of human rights, peace, development, governance, and electoral and constitutional reform. He is often interviewed as a political analyst in both international and domestic media. He attended school at the Don Eugenio Ladrido Memorial Elementary School in Iloilo, the Philippine Science High School, and the University of the Philippines. He is none other than Mr. Ramon C. Casiple.
Well, thank you. And my greetings to President and the officers of the Association for Philippine-China Understanding. Of course, I'm a member, and I'm glad to be active again uh, in this forum. And my fellow speakers in this forum, good afternoon. Now, I would like to share my presentation. This is just a short presentation actually, because the topic, Communist Party of China, of course, is not a Philippine topic at the moment, but certainly we are aware of the uh, developments in China, the role of the Communist Party of China in its development, and I'm glad to speak on that topic today. Uh, I'll be presenting at least some points. Uh, is it already?
Yes, we can see the screen.
Okay. I think we can start with the victory of the Communist Party of China in its war in 1948, because that's the time when developments in China not only uh, became a victory for the Chinese people, it also became a beacon to Asian countries in the rest of the world. And it has been in the international area where Chinese developments is always a topic that is being uh, pursued and listened to by many countries, both those who are friends, and I think some even those who are not so friendly. But the China that we see now is far from the China that was 100 years ago, or even if we use the 1948 as a yardstick, it is a different China from before 1948. And the role that was there has a major part of it, the role of the Communist Party of China. It is undeniable that China developed into the current China of today. And the major factor was the development, continued growth of the Communist Party of China. That is why today we celebrate the 100th year anniversary of the CPC. It cannot be separated from that particular role in its unifying the Chinese nation and developing economy and politics, in setting forth in building the Chinese nation, not only in terms of with developments within the China itself, but even before the world. And it is right now, I think, in a position before the rest of the world on its own terms. And from my perspective, since Philippines is really very near China and we have a lot of relations in the past, China remains a country that we need to study, and the role of the Communist Party of China is definitely one of the topics that need to be studied. And so uh, the, the the development of 1948 of China, uh, and has brought itself to a point where today, in 2021, China stands not only as a strong power which has liberated itself, but now is a global power recognized by all countries, I think, and has basically posited itself as a model for developing other societies in other countries, and is now in a position, I think, that it can confront social and economic problems not only in China, but even in the rest of the world. It has take, taken its place in the community of nations. It is definitely a major factor in the United Nations and other international fora, and China is poised to become a major player in the international political arena. Right now, I think China has developed so far that it can be seen as a global power, not only in terms of being a power for China, but the key path that it has taken is to be a global power, not only in the sense of a major political power in the world, but also in the sense that it is a model that other countries can look at and develop themselves along the lines or along the actuations and persuasions, and of course the accomplishment of the Chinese people. And one thing that I think has to be studied well is the role of the Communist Party of China, because development of China cannot be separated from the development of the Communist Party. How is that? I think we need to learn from China. And from the Philippine perspective, Philippines is a neighbor, and we hope that Philippines remain a friend of China. That, of course, presupposes that there are problems. There are problems, of course, with friends. There are problems with families. It's not a isolated thing. But the one thing that I'm waiting to hear from China and also from the Philippines, of course, is how to solve these problems as friends and as neighbors. Because so many things, I think, that we can unite with China. So many things that we can be able to talk and basically improve relations. The friendship and neighborliness is a major requirement among neighbors and among, particularly in this part of the world, where we have each other as neighbors. And that is actually the one thing that not only the Philippines but all other neighbors of China would like to have as a major plank in their relationship with China. What is the implications of such an approach? Talking as neighbors, talking as friends, basically will develop a peaceful environment, a peaceful and fruitful relationship that can basically improve not only the relationship but even the economic and political uh, accomplishments of its country. I think it is worthwhile to pursue friendships and necessary talks about problems. It is also a must that possibilities for cooperation, possibilities for cooperation not only on regional or neighborly relations, but even on international questions. Many interests are involved, but I don't think that Philippines or China have differing objectives here. And I think one must try and really try to have that dialogue as friends and as neighbors. My last point here is that there is a need to strengthen China-Philippines ties, and the way is to resolve problems as they arise, problems that normally becomes obstacles should be seen not as an obstacles but as something that can positively lead to closer ties. That would, of course, develop peaceful coexistence and mutual benefit on many fronts economic, political, and international. It is not a question on whether or not China and the Philippines should talk to each other. They have to talk to each other precisely because not only are they neighbors, but in many things, I think both countries can agree and one can learn from each other. And I think this is a something that needs to be explored more. What doesn't it, that means is that more cooperation within the region and globally on many international questions. I think there is a basis for saying that in many of these, Philippines and China can achieve unities. The key is to maintain that dialogue, to maintain the opening and closer ties, and make sure that this develop not to be distracted, not to be uh, solely dependent on other things other than relationship between the two countries. And I think many in the Philippines and I think also in China would like to develop fruitful relations not only today but in the coming years because the the question of China is not only a question for China. It is a question for the whole world, including the Philippines. China has a role to play in the international arena. It has a role to play globally. And I think one can achieve that role by basically developing the capacity of China not only to understand the global situation, understand the role of China in that world. The Communist Party of China must also make sure that it understands the world, because it has to do that in order to make sure that China can fit, not fit in the sense that it has to cut itself off, but fit in the sense that it understands and can positively bring about developments that are not only for China, but for the whole world itself. And I wish to give my best wishes on the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China. The Communist Party of China has been instrumental. It has a role to play in this, not only in China, but I think it has a major role to play in the global political, economic, and social scenes. So, best wishes on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China. And we will be waiting for China to be part, not only as part, but I think it has a role to lead in the whole world. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ramon Casiple. And next, we will call on our Apcu Treasurer General Fernando Pache to introduce our third speaker this afternoon.
Thank you very much, President Jeffrey. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Our next speaker is a graduate from the East-West Center and the University of Hawaii, where he earned a doctoral degree in political science. He joined the faculty of Peking University in 2007 and held prior positions at the Renmin University of China, the International University of Japan, and University of Macau. At present, he is a professor in the School of International Studies and Institute of South Cooperation and Development, Peking University. His areas of expertise include international political economy and China's international economic relations, particularly the fields of energy and natural resources, development aid, and the economic political nexus in the Asia-Pacific region. In recent years, his research extended to political and social risk management for Chinese corporations engaged in non-financial investments abroad, and likewise had published 2 books, namely Chinese Investment Overseas, Case Studies on Environmental and Social Risk, Peking University Press, and 2004, and Risk Management under the Belt and Road Initiative, Economic and Social Dimension, with the Oceanic Press, and 2017. He had been frequently invited to serve as non-resident fellow in a number of public policy think tanks and as advisory member of several international exchange associations, including the China chapter of the Council for Security Cooperation in the Asia Pacific and the China Association for International Exchange. He is a member of the decade-long Track 2 Dialogue of Chinese and American Economists, and a member of the Chinese team in the Track to China-US Dialogue on Health in 2021, both organized by the National School of Development, Peking University, and the National Committee on US-China Relations. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present to you Dr. Jia Daojong.
Good afternoon from Beijing, and we are in the same time zone. I'm very happy and honored to be asked to join the forum. The topic is very large. Let me preface my few minutes of presentation by saying that I have actually been to the Philippines several times. The first time I was there was back around 1996, 1997-ish. And the last time I was there, 2019, actually to promote the Institute of South-South Cooperation and Development. I'm not an expert on the Philippines or China-Philippine relations, although I do cherish moments of collaboration with colleagues based in the Philippines. Actually, just this morning, I was reviewing a paper that's going to be published in a special collection, a memorandum of late Dr. Eileen Baviera, who has been a key academic looking at both Southeast Asian security and also the Philippine-China relations. I did write up a short note for this occasion. I'm not going to read it out. Possibly the staff at the embassy later can help make that written draft available to whoever is interested. The hope is that we will be able to engage in some of the Q&A, which is always a highlight of such exercise. So with that precursor, let me just say a few words that's based on the prepared text. Tomorrow will be formally the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. When we look at the past 100 years, the country has gained, among other things, a great degree of self-confidence as a nation, as a people. It's not just the size of the economy. As I wrote this morning in the review comment, China's economic growth could not have become possible without collaboration and without cherishing the value of mutual dependence, interdependence between China and its neighbors, and in today's occasion, and the Philippines. So it's not just China providing economic goods for the rest, it's actually different economies and China growing together. And in security terms, let's say it's quite accurate to say that China has achieved a degree of security in the world that's unparalleled in its own history. As was noted by the first speaker, Mr. Tan, China has become a pillar of world stability and development through contributions to the United Nations peacekeeping force, UN peacekeeping and other security-related efforts that are authorized by the United Nations. China does build a military force, including a naval force, but the function, the primary goal of this is to deter, once again, any sort of adventurous actions that may be against China, the Chinese people, the territory, and its interests. So we have to bear that in mind. Outside China, there is that expectation, and within China, it's also in our interest to keep the nature of these armed forces primarily for self-defense. It's not meant to be an offense force. Now, in terms of the quote-unquote secret of success of the party, which has prevailed against odds of different kinds in different times, and also criticism, confrontation, competition, and from the outside world, I would think the first is that the party has maintained always a vision or a fortitude in what Chairman Mao used to say, that China and the Chinese ought to be a positive force of advancement of welfare for the entire humankind. And having that in mind, if you look at I would say it was the secret to success during the 1930s, 1930s, and especially 1930s and 1940s. It was that the CPC, the Communist Party of China, firmly sided with the interests of the unlanded populations of China, with the poor and the needy. And if you look at the opening and reform, rejoining the international chains of production, again, it was to provide employment for as large a segment of its people. And under the leadership of President Xi Jinping, as you have noted, right, China made eradication of absolute poverty. It's one of the prime goals of governance. We cannot just rest on the laureate of China having achieved the goal of eradicating, contributing to some 2/3 of total poverty eradication around the world, which was achieved in the early 2000s. So that's the first point. That is to say, so long as you root your policies by in delivering tangible growth in income in the hands of the largest possible segment of your population, you will get the support domestically. You will be able to weather through the shifts and or the waves of change in world economics and politics. A second point I wrote in the paper is that a lot of observers look at the Chinese Communist Party by looking at its origins in ideology, which is imported from Europe, including revolutionary Russia. But that really is not so true. You have to look at the other side of this. That was, as I wrote in the paper, 1919 is a watershed year in terms of the pursuit of self-destiny of the country, in the pursuit of some control of the fate of the nation. 1919, you had the Treaty of Versailles, that I'm not very good at pronouncing that French word. You had the May 4th movement. And the May 4th movement, which greatly inspired the later generations of members of the Communist Party of China, it really is centered on two key points. One is that self-strengthening. You have to have domestic unity. You have to have a gathering of purpose. And then second is to resist foreign pressure. I'm doing a lot more, reading more and more history as I get older, right? If you look at this effort of gaining a control of your own destiny, and then today through the United Nations system to preserve sovereignty is the second a second key, I would say, to the Chinese Communist Party's approach to governance. A third point is that under the leadership of the party, China has been agile in relating to different countries, different nations with different backgrounds and different ideologies. In foreign policy, very much like domestic politics, you had what Mr. Deng Xiaoping famously said about whether, the color of the skin color of the cat mattered less than its performance. So we're really looking at that for that comfort level in terms of relating to each other. This is very much in line with the wishes that were just expressed by Professor Kasipel just a moment ago. So we can go on and on as scholars about different periods. I just want to remind you, even during the 1960s, especially for that decade when we were under complete embargo led by the United States, China was relating to Japan and Western Europe. Chairman Mao's theory of the three words was the way to convince the population of the country, to justify that China should be relating to people of all kinds that are receptive of this Chinese pursuit of growth and development for the country. And through that, the Chinese population has always been a huge segment of global population by making China a home for most of the Chinese rather than a source of burden in terms of demographics, global demographics. We were wanting to contribute to the world growth. The last point in the note I made, which is also I'm going to wrap up very soon, is that the Communist Party is a unique strength in conducting self-reflection and self-change. Some of you who watched Chinese foreign politics may have noticed that recently President Xi chaired a study session of the Politburo, whereby he said China should make a more strenuous effort to make the country admirable and more friendly to the rest of the world. In many ways, that's a self-corrective force to some of the foreign policy behaviors by some of the individual diplomats. So the self-reflection and self-change, rather than acting at the demands of others, and in that way we have achieved in our diplomacy a space, should we say, for continuing consultations and improvement with others. So they very much like all other countries, the Philippines included, big or small, Chinese foreign policy or Chinese domestic governance is centered around the pursuit of peace and development. This is a choice. This is a demand, actually. It's not a choice for all humankind. Very much, if we look at the aggregate of what the Communist Party has delivered over the past, since its founding 100 years ago, China does have a solid basis for celebration, but we're also clear that the trajectories of a political party, like that of a human being, are seldom linear. There is that one ancient Chinese saying that is to say, you should not get overwhelmed by your achievements, nor should you be subdued by your setbacks. That applies to the functioning of the party and the government. And to me as an individual, and certainly I don't speak for our diplomats, but I also think that also applies to all of us here based in China. Now, on that note, let me just pause and see later on if we have questions and comments.
Thank you, Professor Cha Taojiong, for your speech. And now we'll go to the open forum. Charze Duffer Tan Qingsheng has graciously agreed to answer a few of our questions. So we will start with Charze Duffer Tan. What can the Philippines learn and apply in the rise of modern China in the past 40 years? Charze Duffer Tan, you're on mute. Okay, you may speak now.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Over the past 4 decades, China indeed has made a lot of progress. However, every country has its own unique realities and development circumstances. I'm not sure if the Philippines can learn from China's experience. If there are some, personally, I think modern China's success lies in 3 aspects. First, political stability is the foundation of success, which will secure a peaceful and conducive environment for your development. Secondly, policy continuation is a guarantee for long-term development. China has maintained the same strategy of development and stayed on the right course since the reform and opening up. And this year marks the first year of our 14th five-year plan. Thirdly, I think maybe opening up the economy is very important. We have gone through a painful process to push our enterprises to compete with foreign companies and allow foreign investments to enter China in the 1990s. However, it is the only way to improve the competitiveness of your economy and to integrate the economy with the global market. Thank you.
Thank you for your policy recommendations. Another question, Charze Duffer Tan. What else do you think can China do to help the Philippines recover from COVID and so that we can restore full economic growth as soon as possible?
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, China has donated well-needed medical supplies, shared our hard-earned experience, and we even dispatched in a medical expert team to the Philippines. And the Chinese vaccine, Sinovac, was the first COVID vaccine to arrive in the Philippines. And we have reached an agreement that this year, the Philippines will procure 25 million doses of Sinovac. As of now, 12 million doses Sinovac vaccines have already arrived in the Philippines. Moreover, the Philippine government and China's Sinopharm is also discussing the entry of Sinopharm vaccines to the Philippine market. Vaccine is a key part to control the pandemic and economic recovery. And I'm sure China will continue to ensure the stable vaccine supply and shipment and stands ready to provide anti-pandemic assistance to the Philippines. As you may know, China is one of the first major economies that has rebounded from the pandemic. I believe that China's continued economic recovery will be an important opportunity for the countries around the world, including the Philippines. If we can maintain the momentum of bilateral trade and investment cooperation, The Philippines' recovery will surely be realized soon. Thank you.
Thank you. And well, a third question for you. Upon the opening up of China 40 years ago, the United States has done a lot of trade with China, hoping and expecting that a big, rich Chinese middle class will demand more US-style democracy and weaken the Chinese Communist Party. But it has only strengthened the political standing of the CPC. Can you explain this paradox?
I think the United States has a lot of expectations on China. However, few have been realized. Firstly, I think the political standing of any party in the world is only decided by its own performance and the popular support the party can get. As I have mentioned, the aspiration and aim of the CPC is to serve the people and improve Chinese people's well-being. With its remarkable achievements and overwhelming support of the Chinese people, the bigger and richer the middle class becomes. In fact, the more popular the CPC will be. Secondly, I think the United States has its own definition of the democracy. But my personal view is that democracy is not Coca-Cola, which tastes the same across the world. It should not be defined and judged by certain countries. Different countries have different cultures, and they have different understanding of democracy and the means to achieve it. China has its own democracy, which is not exactly the same as that of the Western countries like the United States. China's democracy is deeply rooted in its Asian culture. We put a lot of emphasis on internal coordination and consensus building. We pursue a balance between individual and collective interests. I think maybe that's the reason why the US makes the wrong judgments on China. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Sharzay Dafer Tan, for your time. Next, we have a question for Monka Siple. Perhaps you would like to answer the same question, which is ironically, a big Chinese middle class, which has now become quite well-to-do, has only strengthened the political standing of the CPC. Would you like to explain this, Mon?
Well, as an outsider, of course, I'm not in the position actually to correctly answer that question. You have to ask the Chinese people themselves. But from my point of view, given the history of the CPC itself, its origins actually is, I think, a lot of the middle class in China were the first members. And during the whole period of the struggle of the CPC, a lot of them have still continued to be part of that. So it's not something that is strange that the role of the middle class in the CPC, it's actually quite normal, I think, in their context. And my own thinking there is that the middle class, I think, has taken measure of the development since liberation, the development, the goals, the achievements of China. And I think we are in a position to appreciate the achievement of these goals. I think it's worth, you know, thinking how the middle class in China became actually the majority. In fact, today, China has already announced the end of poverty in China. But means what we mean by middle class before is actually the majority of the people now in China. So it's not a strange thing, I think, that what we call the middle class is actually a status that has been reached. That's the product of the liberation, the product of the modernization of China.
Thank you, Mon. Professor Tsa, would you like to answer the same question?
Well, would think the surprise on the part of political scientists, not just in the United States, but many other parts of the world, about the rise of middle class in China and the absence of challenging the authority government. That surprise probably comes from understanding of the nature of relationship between government and the people. In modern political science, as I studied in American colleges, the nature of that relationship is conflictual, is even confrontational. But when you look at the Chinese tradition, going back to the years of the dynasties, revolutions took place precisely because government failed. The emperors, the ruling class, to truly deliver, not just claim to represent the interests of the largest segment of society. That being point one. And one of the lessons the Communist Party has learned from that, which is led to its longevity, is that it has to, if you look at the doctrinarian literature, especially the early stages, it talks about class struggle. But since it gained the mandate to run the country, to govern the country, class warfare was not the focus of governance. Instead, the party followed the principle of leaving nobody behind. As I mentioned earlier on, even when you had a high growth, the country ventured into poverty eradication against most of the predictions of just put the money into the more productive elements of the economy. The third factor here is that yes, we have many different ethnic groups, but overall, beginning with a shared written language, overall, this country, nation has benefited from a sort of monoculture. You have this understanding of the country as a family, right? At the end of the day, you are connected. There are differences, but those differences should be kept within the bound of kinship. And that kinship in the countrywide sense is to preserve the overall stability of the nation as a whole. I think that's probably some of the factors that often get missed for outsiders looking at Chinese development. And over the years, especially in the past 20, 30 years, this mass migration for people across the country helped to strengthen the self of people relying on each other, weaving together a kind of social network. That social network is more in appreciation of the value of stability, the value of aggregate growth that can bring benefits to different individuals. So in other words, the country learned, the populations itself learned to become less divisive.
Thank you, Professor Tsa. Another question. The United States has imposed higher tariffs on almost all Chinese imports, banned Huawei and TikTok, and has pushed the Quad and NATO against China. Do you see any threat or problems for the CPC and China as a result of all these moves? Professor Cha?
I don't mean to just say this for theatrics. Frankly speaking, this imposition of tariffs on the economic front and the launch of the Quad and the encouragement of NATO to take on China, this will actually help strengthen the CCP. Why? Because like all other political parties, including that of the United States, as a party, it will be able to take credit of demonstrating to its populace, saying it can prevail against all these kind of odds. One of the things people don't talk about is the high degree of intermediate products in product trade between China and the United States. In other words, China imports products that are parts that are made in third markets and export to the United States. So and then you look at, it's not unique to China. You look at the overall US trade deficit with the rest of Asia, it was mainly a shift of location. And the Americans, consumers pay the cost of higher tariffs. Of course, our consumers suffer too. It's not a happy situation, but you always adapt. For example, over the years, Vietnam, Malaysia, and I hope the Philippines more and more has benefited from the shifting of production, including that by Chinese companies, due to this kind of pressure. But it may actually help create a more dynamic and more locally resilient, regionally here in the Pacific, Asian part of the Pacific, regionally resilient chain of production. It will may eventually benefit our region. So this is not just to be celebratory, but I don't think the higher tariffs mean the end of the tunnel in any sense. Now, in terms of the Quad, oh my goodness, each country's main business is its own business, including that for the United States. I don't really think Quad has much of any future at all, because as this is what I say on virtually all these webinars I have with anyone. When you design a policy that's based on making life miserable for someone else without being provoked, the Quad members, in a security sense, in security meaning in the military weapon designs or deployment, how on earth would Australia be in this? We don't get that. So I don't think Quad has much of any future at all. It's just so poorly conceived and if let me give a challenge to those elements that support the Quad. They did announce that they were going to support countries mainly in Southeast Asia and the Pacific with $1 billion dosage of vaccines, right? Where are those vaccines? You cannot just keep talking. You have to do something. I think that's probably what I would say about the Quad.
Thank you, Professor Cha. Mon, would you like to answer the same question? Do you see any threat or problems for the CPC as a result of the recent US moves against China?
Well, I don't think so. First of all, China has its own trade relations with the rest of the world. It's not contingent for China to rely on US policy. In fact, I would think they are competitive in the global market. And it's up to the US to manifest its capability. It's not for China to answer, I think, for what its companies are doing in the US. Because Chinese companies working in the US are basically doing so by the rules of the US. When the US government changed those rules, the companies either have to accept that or do something else. I mean, they are not they are not compelled to do that, to follow any such. After all, foreign trade, world trade is basically, I think, in a capitalist market, it's competitive. So it's US that has to demonstrate that it can compete with goods from China, with the products coming from China. It's not the other way around. I think the, the policies that the US did basically is a result of their weaknesses. They could not compete, I think.
Thank you, Mon. There is no doubt that China has done very well, especially the past 40 years. Now let's talk about its long-term future. Professor Cha, China has recently abolished term limits, on the president of China. Do you think this is good for the CPC and China?
Well, this is a very challenging question. I don't know if there is formal documentation that says term limits on the presidency has been abolished. It's one of those tacit understandings, and I can go on and on in many ways. The current situation results from assessment of the recent past, when you had 5-year terms for the presidency, the prime ministership, and the different ministries. China is a country with one of the longest traditions of bureaucracy. With that arrangement in the past, what you had is that before and during the transition, many of the government bureaucrats were probably more oriented toward finding positions for themselves. That did not really contribute to focus on policy and policy innovation. And in many ways, that was a source of the kind of corruption in which the Communist Party has spent a lot of time fighting against. That being one point. The second point is that in looking at China or other countries, policy continuity, innovation, actual delivery, the performance, these are the things that eventually matter. I would think the verdict on this, or the issue, I think, again, in political science terms, the issue goes back to the mandate. The mandate really has to come from the performance, from the actual benefits it delivers to the largest segment of the population.
Thank you, Professor Cha. Mon, would you like to answer the same question? Do you think the abolition or lifting of term limits on presidency, is it a good thing for the CPC and China?
Well, a lot of that kind of questions is related to the way the political party conducts its business. Because political parties are the movers, actually, in a political system. And the Communist Party, I think, is right now within the midst of those discussions. They have tried historically a lot of arrangement. There were terms, there were no terms, there were agreements, and all that. I think the process is still not ended until I see a specific agreement that everybody can say yes. But we have to see that they need to have agreements. That's the whole problem. Whenever Chinese leaders, and that includes the party, have differences of opinion, and they could not settle those differences within the party, usually it goes out of the party. It even becomes a possibly political question. The key here is not on the existence of that situation, term limits, and so on. I think the question is on, is there an agreement not only within the party, not only within government, and how the process should be done? Because if there is no agreement, what that basically lays the term for disruption. But if there is an agreement, even if it's question of uh, open terms, I think it's okay.
Okay, thank you, Mon. Another question. In the past 10 years, China has become more assertive in the West Philippine Sea and perceived in the Philippines as an unfriendly hub. And China is bent on reunification with Taiwan in the coming years. My question is, how vital are these to the primacy of CPC in China?
This actually is not a question about the party or the primacy of the party. It's an issue for the country or the nation. I do actually write about these topics. I've spoken very extensively with colleagues in the Philippines and throughout Southeast Asia on these topics. Very quickly, I have 4 points to observe. One is that there are histories to this. I'm not talking about ancient histories. Between China and the Philippines and other countries, if we were able to go back and I know it's difficult, but probably one way is to try to come up with a collaborative chronology of events, looking at pivotal times in the past, what happened and how this happening needs to be understood. This is important because diplomats, including diplomats, bureaucrats within countries are under pressure to demonstrate their patriotism, but often they are not very familiar with the evolution of things. But within societies, each society, you have individuals and entities that have that kind of institutional memory, trying to be on the same page about how it comes to a particular point. That by have, for example, if we make 1945, August 15th as a cutoff date, or before or after, let's walk through ourselves. That's probably one. The first point I want to share with this forum. And secondly, over the years, China and the Philippines have found a way to make conflict avoidance. I'm not just talking about what happened before and after the summer of 2016 when the tribunal findings was announced. I'm talking about going, way before and afterwards. We try to minimize the damage. I wouldn't say damage. Each nation has its own unique circumstances. Its position is hard to change, and we don't really demand that change. We try to find that, however limited, workable zone whereby we interact. A third point, maritime space and economies. unless, people focus at some of the academics or security think tanks based in North America and Europe, they base their assessment of how terrible the situation is or can be by looking at the ocean as a space for passage of their military vehicles, including underwater ones. Unless you do that, what we really need to be working more on between China, I often, when I go to Singapore or Indonesia, Malaysia, I often talk more about dealing with some of the challenges in terms of shipping in the Sulu Sea and other parts. This is not a Chinese assertion of interest. We don't have direct interest. Safety in commercial navigation, in aviation, and to the extent then reducing plastic pollution of the ocean by plastics, and include preservation of stocks and the reduction of wasteful dumping into the ocean. These are the matters in terms of friendly use of the sea and make it. These things need to happen regardless how you eventually draw a line, whatever line in the oceans. And the last point I would make is that you mentioned Taiwan, right? Technically, if you look at the core principles of international law, the Communist Party of China and the Kuomintang of China, at least, okay, that still remains the political force on that island. We're still technically in the civil war. There was unfinished civil war. Many in Taiwan today, including the ruling party, they would argue, well, there was a newborn, there is a new beginning. But look, Taiwan has its own history. That's all right, but you cannot just cut it off and say, history began with the birth of this new party. And if Taiwan wanted to claim sovereignty, that sovereignty has a much longer history than the birth of that party. It's a sad situation in many ways that politics has become so, I don't know how to describe it, has become such that this time around, Taiwan really, its governing authority really chose to pursue vaccines from as far as possible, just anybody from the mainland, which is a very senseless sort of way of conducting politics and policy anywhere in the world. It's not something I feel happy about at all. So, we have these differences, but at the end of the day, we should be trying to look for certitude, say which of these arguments that fly in, especially when you get input from afar that may be very lucidly worded, may be powerfully delivered or get repeated, including through college textbooks. What's the certitude? Where do you get the certitude? How do you assess the actual deliveries in terms of impact on life for the people, especially those and living along the coastal regions of these waters? Those are the salient issues we ought to be bearing in mind.
Thank you, Professor Cha. Mon, would you like to answer the same question? Mon, you're on mute.
It's basically an internal question for me. It's between the Chinese and the Taiwanese. Well, my only concern that is that that situation between China should not lead to more problems, because I think in modern times we can always talk and try to settle I don't know if there is negotiations going on or there have been a history of trying to sound out each other. But I think the best way to handle that at the moment, and this is in behalf of both people in the mainland and in Taiwan, is that you talk it over. You don't do anything rash, precisely because you are you have the history and you have the relationship.
Thank you, Mon. One last question. What can Apcu, as the pioneer since 1974, do to further promote people-to-people relations between China and the Philippines? Professor Cha.
You mentioned 1974, which reminded me of episodes of interactions between our two countries, right in the wake of the Arab oil embargo. By virtue of hosting military bases of the United States, the Philippines suffered from fuel shortages, right? And those days, China had oil to export, and we delivered oil to the Philippines and also to Thailand and others that got into an adverse situation. This is the kind of people-to-people that was one of the beginnings of the interactions between the peoples of the countries. We did not have a diplomatic relationship those days. What I'm really trying to say is that I drafted a note for myself when I got the question. I will say 2 points. One is that the Philippines actually at the level of people, of society, has a lot to teach China. Now you may think this to be artificial, but that's really not true. When you go back to the history of interactions at the real people level, when you look at China's opening and reform, including for people like me, individuals as scholars when we were younger. Here in Asia, Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand, Xinmatai, that were open to receiving Chinese tourists. This helped greatly our people, individuals, to learn what it means to interact with the rest of the world. They don't just go there to shop, look at shops. They can interact, they can observe, they find new business opportunities. And out of that, it grew a lot of sensible, bottom-up level of projects of collaboration. So what I'm really trying to, it took me a few minutes to come to this, tourism. Tourism is not just to get the dollars and bus the people to the resorts. Tourism is about letting people, creating a venue for individuals to see and feel it. And, these two, of course, tourism is also two-way tourism. Philippines nationals come to China as well. And in this connection, I must emphasize that if you look at China's relationship with Southeast Asia, or in some ways with Australia as well as a precedent, a more strenuous effort ought to be made to have the non-ethnic Chinese, the non-ethnic component of the Philippine population to interact here with the ethnic, the society here in China. When Eileen was still a professor at the University of Philippines, she used to lament, I think it's a right one, that it was so difficult for Philippine educational universities to go beyond Xiamen and Guangzhou. When they come to Shanghai or Beijing, they got very little traction. And that's not a satisfactory situation. more effort ought to be made to have the mainstream segments of the elites of the countries to interact with each other. We don't have a lot of, well, what I'm really trying to say is this. Too often when we think about people-to-people exchange, we think about the Philippine scholars, businessmen, whoever else who are already familiar with China or the language. But that really is only partial. We have to somehow have the mainstream of the Philippine business, especially business and academic elites, to be part of this understanding China. Likewise, here, I would hope Mr. Tang is listening. I know I met him before he left the post here in Beijing. He was first, prior to the Philippines, I believe he was post in Cambodia. We're good friends. And I would think the embassy of China in the Philippines and also the Philippine embassy in Beijing should work to bring the Chinese scholars who don't specialize in studying the Philippines or the Southeast Asia. Maybe those people who specialize in studying global issues or the US and Europe to get to know each other. That's one way of thinking out of the box. That's one way of dealing with the kind of situation that Eileen used to say, saying, somehow the Philippine scholars could only hope to reach Xiamen and Guangzhou. So people to people, one is tourism, the other is that to get the people, get the creative elements of the society, the mainstream, to interact with each other, to appreciate each other's working environments, and on that basis, to find innovative ways of connectivity between our two societies.
Thank you, Professor Cha. Mon, would you like to answer the same question?
I share the same sentiments actually, and I don't have anything to add. I think that was very well articulated.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So thank you, Sharzay Dafer, Tan Ching Sheng, Professor Cha Taojiong, and Professor Ramon Casiple for being with us an entire 2 hours in this forum. Before we proceed, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Korn Tabaransi, former Deputy Prime Minister of Thailand. He is now President of the Thai-Chinese Friendship Association, our Thai counterpart of Apcu, and also Mr. Ting Hong from Beijing, our counterpart in China. And we now would like to call on Apcu former President, Dr. Gabi Lopez, to give the closing remarks.
Good afternoon, President. Thank you very much, and welcome to our distinguished guests. Very warm greetings to our Chinese friends and happy centennial of the Chinese Communist Party. Warm felicitations. Wishing you more centennials ahead. I wish to note some valuable lessons from the historical experiences of the party for all parties anywhere as part of organizational management and development and success. Number one, have a clear vision and mission, which are basic to provide the organization with a guiding star. In this case, serve the people. Number two, correct strategies and tactics to reach these are necessary, created by integrating scientific, critical, and creative thinking in the context of the VUCAD, or volatile, unpredictable, complex, ambiguous, disrupted environment. And because of this, China opened up to the globe and has become a global partner in development. Number 3, practice of deliberate planned action to carry out the correct strategies and tactics with doctrinal and organizational discipline. This must be always enforced. Number 4, commitment to and patient exercise of continuous learning to institutionalize successful correct principles and practices and discard correct and change failing and wrong principles and practices. And number 5, authentic, heroic servant leadership. As an observation, the centennial of the successful Chinese Communist Party coincides with the 500th year of the enlightenment of a leader that I admire because he founded our order and school, Ignatius of Loyola, the Basque former military officer who founded the Jesuit order, which operates and serves communities globally. The Jesuit order has been branded as a communalistic organization that continuously practices discernment to plan out purposive strategies and action plans to improve society and humankind, similarly to the Communist Party of China. Let us celebrate and share the useful lessons to minimize global poverty and global conflict. Mabuhay to the Chinese Communist Party. Mabuhay to the long-standing Philippines-China relationship. Yuye Wanshui. Salamat po and magandang hapon.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Gabi Lopez. We would like to remind everyone that next Thursday, July 8 at 3 p.m., we will have Yusek Seferino Rodolfo Jr., PhD, Head of the Board of Investments, to talk about Chinese investments in the Philippines. And please be with us on August 6, 3 p.m., when we have the awarding of the Apcu laureates at Grand Marriott Hotel. It will be shown through Zoom and it will be available to all of you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today and have a great day ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.